Let's start with the unlucky and slowly work our way to the ones who were truly cursed. Number 9. The Astor family. If you were alive in New York during the Gilded Age, you would have definitely heard about the Astor family. Since this name struck paralyzing awe into the hearts of the American elite, this was a family that once ruled over high society, where money and power seemed impossible to lose. But here's the thing, their fortune was huge, but over time, it slowly faded, leaving behind only a small part of what once was, so that when new generations came, the money that had once made them one of the richest families in America started to disappear, divided among too many heirs and lost to careless spending. This would, of course, lead the wasteful habits of their children straight into financial disaster, where they would then come face to face with losing everything. But to the unlucky heirs, they never actually saw it coming, and all they would hear were the whispers of bad investments and endless spending eating away at their fortune. And in a matter of years, these small money problems turned into millions lost, leaving them with no way to stop it. These mistakes would then begin to destroy their wealth, bit by bit, with nothing they could do. Now, they might be able to hold on to their fortune for a little longer, selling houses, making risky deals. But in the end, the family's money would run out. And while they tried to act like nothing was wrong, their homes, their parties, and their powerful name would slowly lose their meaning. Eventually, when they realized the money was gone, they would understand just how far they had fallen. Big houses sold, their power gone, and the Astor name no longer meaning what it used to. But it didn't stop there. The family would struggle for many years, watching their importance disappear as new rich families took their place. By the time their reign was over, all they had left was a famous name, one still in history, but no longer in power. Number 8. Windsor. This was yet another royal family that seemed impossible to break. The House of Windsor was a dynasty that ruled over Britain, holding power, wealth, and tradition for generations. This form of monarchy was originally designed to keep the royal bloodline strong, ensuring that the throne would always remain in the hands of kings and queens. But here's the thing, just like the rack in the Tower of London, the pressure kept tightening, pulling the family apart with every new scandal, tragedy, and betrayal. You see, when a new member entered the royal family, they were tied down by rules, expectations, and duty. Every move was watched, every word controlled, where the media and the public slowly increased the pressure, locking them in place. With every single scandal, the strain on the family grew. Marriages collapsed, reputations shattered, and secrets were exposed. This was all done to keep the monarchy strong. But of course, a lot of the time, the truth wasn't what people wanted to hear. And the royal family would then begin to say whatever they believed the world wanted them to say. Sometimes it would work, and the press would leave them alone. Other times, they were torn apart even more, criticized for their lies, their actions, or for simply being who they were. When the whole ordeal was over, the family was usually left shaken but still standing. But sometimes they didn't make it through. That was the case with Princess Diana, who spent years under the strain of the royal machine, twisting, pulling, and breaking her spirit until eventually, she was gone. All this because she didn't want to play by the rules of the monarchy. She tried to speak, she tried to live her own life, and in the end, she paid the ultimate price. Number 7. Guinness family. This brutal fate was carried out on heirs who were born into wealth but dragged down by tragedy. It started with a fortune tied to the family name, then looped through generations of privilege before being pulled down by scandal. The heirs were then thrown into the world of high society while the weight of expectation pulled on them from all sides, dragging them through the dangers of wealth, addiction, and self-destruction, which is how this family's story gets its name. But a lot of the times they wouldn't even see it coming, since many were already too lost before they even realized. Kind of just depends on how strong they were when the tragedies struck. Not only were these heirs drowning in money and fame, but they were also getting ripped apart by the pressure, the scandals, and the expectations placed on them from birth. But if by some miracle, a family member actually happens to make it all the way through without losing themselves, one of 3 things will happen. 1. They will be hit with another tragedy and for sure be broken by then. 2. They will survive and continue on, but live their life haunted by the ghosts of their family's past. Or 3. They will try to ignore it all and pretend the Guinness curse was never real, while still carrying the scars of those who didn't make it. Number 6. Vanderbilt family. Now we are getting to the part of the list where losing everything is no longer an option. It's a guarantee. This family's wealth was once one of the greatest fortunes in American history, but as time went on, that fortune began to crumble. And not slowly either. It collapsed at full speed. What type of mistakes would you have to make to lose billions, you might ask? Well, apparently, just being born into the Vanderbilt name was enough. And of course, reckless spending, bad investments, and ignoring every possible warning sign also helped speed things along. But the most disturbing case in this downfall was when the heirs, one after another, managed to burn through millions without even trying, simply because they could. The man who bought a massive mansion he didn't need? Gone. The one who gambled his fortune away? Gone. The one who thought wealth would last forever? Gone. The one who spent everything on lavish parties while his family's fortune bled out? Well, at least he had fun. There are a few ways this financial ruin went down, but one thing always stayed the same. There was always someone pulling the strings, making terrible choices, and ensuring that every last dollar disappeared. The first method was the one you better hope for if you were a Vanderbilt. Here, you might waste money on a few luxuries and still walk away with something left. Now, the second method is much worse. The heirs would go on massive spending sprees, blowing millions on yachts, mansions, and things they didn't even use until there was nothing left. But the final and worst way? When an entire family, generation after generation, ignored every sign of disaster and let their fortune slip away, dollar by dollar, until there was nothing left but a famous name. This was the more dramatic route the Vanderbilts chose to take, and it made for a truly painful experience for everyone, except for the ones who spent it all. They loved it. Number 5. Getty family. Probably one of the worst stories of wealth and tragedy on the list. This family had everything: power, money, fame, but their story took a dark turn, filled with greed, betrayal, and suffering. The downfall started in the 20th century, usually targeting those closest to the family fortune, the heirs, the ones meant to carry on the legacy. This tragedy would start by having a family member born into extreme wealth, their entire life mapped out for them. They were tied to the Getty name, whether they wanted it or not. They would then be raised in luxury, surrounded by the finest things, but with one major problem. Money was always more important than family. And as soon as they reached adulthood, the reality would hit. You see, J. Paul Getty, the oil tycoon behind the fortune, was known for being one of the richest men in the world, but also one of the stingiest. He treated money as something to hoard, not to share. Even when his own grandson was kidnapped in 1973, he refused to pay the ransom at first. The kidnappers cut off the boy's ear and sent it in the mail to force a response. And when Getty finally agreed to pay, he only covered the ransom because it was tax deductible. But wait. There's another version of this story as well. You see, money wasn't the only problem. Addiction, overdoses, and tragedies followed the Getty heirs like a curse. Some would inherit millions, but lose themselves along the way. Others would die young, trapped in a life they never really controlled. They would suffer for years, drowning in wealth but never finding peace. Until eventually, the Getty family name became a symbol of both extreme riches and extreme misery. Number 4. Onassis family. A name once tied to power, luxury, and one of the most famous love stories in history. But behind the wealth, their story is one of loss, tragedy, and misfortune. This all begins with Aristotle Onassis, a Greek shipping magnate who built a fortune so massive it seemed untouchable. But just to make sure his legacy would live on, he married Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of the late US president. Now, you would think this was the ultimate love story, but no, this was just the beginning. Because as soon as they were married, the tragedies started piling up. First, there was Alexander Onassis, Aristotle's beloved son and the one meant to take over the empire. But at just 24 years old, he was killed in a plane crash. This destroyed Aristotle. He lost all interest in his business and his fortune. And just 2 years later, he followed his son to the grave. But don't worry. Later on, his daughter Christina would take over. She inherited billions, but money could never fix what was already broken. She was married 4 times, always searching for something she could never find. And at just 37 years old, Christina was found dead in her bathtub. Some say it was a heart attack, others believe it was something much darker. You see, by the end, the Onassis family name was still famous, but the fortune, the legacy, the heirs, all gone. The last surviving Onassis, Christina's only daughter, chose to stay away, leaving the empire to disappear like it never existed. Number 3. Habsburg family. This is one of the most twisted royal bloodlines in all of European history, and it involves the dangers of inbreeding. I will cover 2 of them here, as they are very similar. The first use of royal inbreeding dates back to the early days of the Habsburg dynasty, a family so powerful they controlled Austria, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire for centuries. But they also kept their power through marriage, specifically to their own relatives. And at first it worked, but over time things got disturbing. One of the most extreme cases was Charles II of Spain, the result of 200 years of royal inbreeding. He was so physically and mentally impaired that he couldn't even speak properly. His tongue was too large for his mouth and his jaw was so deformed he could barely chew food. He was constantly sick, weak, and infertile, making him the last of his line. But the second case was much, much worse, and it was highly secretive. The Austrian branch of the Habsburgs had their own problems, but they weren't just physical, they were obsessed with control. In the 19th century, Emperor Franz Joseph ruled over a crumbling empire. And when his own son, Crown Prince Rudolf, tried to escape his fate, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The official story? A suicide pact with his teenage mistress. But many believe it was something much darker, something arranged by the very family he was trying to escape. Nobody really knows how many lives were lost due to the Habsburg curse, but we do know that their dynasty ended in complete ruin. Their empire collapsed in 1918, and the once mighty bloodline that ruled for centuries was finally wiped out. Number 2. Romanov family. The last known Romanov ruler was executed in the early 1900s in Russia. This all came to light in 1918 when reports began to spread about the brutal end of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. At first, the official story was unclear. Some believed they had been sent to exile, while others suspected something far worse. But just a year later, the truth emerged. The Romanovs had been taken to a small house in Yekaterinburg, where they were told they would be moved to a safer location. Instead, they were led to a basement, where a group of armed men waited for them. Within moments, the order was given, and gunfire filled the room. Now let's talk about the Bolsheviks, since they loved this form of punishment so much. This was used on aristocrats, political enemies, and anyone who posed a threat to their revolution. And after 1917, the Romanovs became their most important target. Tsar Nicholas II had already abdicated, but that wasn't enough. The revolutionaries wanted to erase the entire royal bloodline. That meant his wife Alexandra, his 4 daughters, and his sickly son Alexei had to go too. But I can only assume this was more tragic than anything, since every time Russia faced a crisis in the years after, people whispered about the Romanovs. Some even believed Anastasia had survived, and rumors of her escape lasted for decades. But the horror didn't stop there, because after their execution, their bodies were dumped in a forest, burned with acid, and buried in an unmarked grave. For years, their final resting place remained a mystery, with some remains only being discovered in the 2000s. There were even reports that some royalists never gave up hope, believing the true heir might one day return. But by then, the Romanovs were long gone, their dynasty shattered, and their empire nothing but a memory. Number 1. Kennedy family. A cycle of misfortune, tragedy, and loss. The Kennedys were once seen as America's royal family, wealthy, powerful, and admired. But as time went on, their name became known for something else: death, disaster, and bad luck that seemed almost supernatural. One of the most famous cases isn't even John F. Kennedy. It's his older brother Joe. He was supposed to be the one to lead the family into politics. But during World War II, he was sent on a dangerous mission. His plane exploded midair, killing him instantly. And just like that, the heir of the Kennedy dynasty was gone. But it didn't stop there, because in 1948, JFK's sister, Kathleen, died in a plane crash. And then came the 1960s. John F. Kennedy, young, charismatic, and the President of the United States, was assassinated in broad daylight. His brother Robert was shot just 5 years later while running for president. At this point, the Kennedy name became synonymous with tragedy. And just when you think this section is over, it just keeps on giving. John F. Kennedy Jr., plane crash. David Kennedy, overdose. Michael Kennedy, skiing accident. Even Rosemary Kennedy, JFK's sister, suffered, except she wasn't assassinated or in an accident. No, her father had her lobotomized when she was just 23 years old. She spent the rest of her life in an institution, forgotten. For years, people have debated whether the Kennedys are cursed, or if it's just a series of unfortunate coincidences. But one thing is certain: no other American family has faced this much loss in such a short amount of time. And despite their money, power, and influence, not even the Kennedys could escape their fate. By the way, thank you for watching.